Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the first in a series of events titled Amplifying BIPOC Voices in Sustainability, hosted by the interns at the UW-Madison Office of Sustainability. Thank you so much for joining us. The theme of tonight's event is what amplifying voices looks like. Before we begin, we at the Office of Sustainability want to acknowledge the lack of diversity both within our team and our office, which is almost entirely white. This reflects a larger trend across campus and in mainstream environmentalism in which the necessary and valuable voices of BIPOC who have long led the fight to protect our communities and environment are excluded. We've created this series in an effort to recenter these voices within our own campus community. In addition, we believe that it is important to acknowledge that sustainability is not just about the environment, but it is also tied to social and economic factors and influences. This series will help to illuminate those facets of sustainability. For today's panel, we will have three guest speakers. We will have three guest speakers, Sumudu Attapattu, Caitlyn LoMonte, and Juliana Bennett. Each panelist will present for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we will have them answer some pre-chosen questions during a roundtable discussion. And finally, we will allow questions from the audience at the end. Feel free to leave questions in the chat box as we will have someone monitoring it. So to begin, we will have Sumudu Attapattu, who is the Director of Research Centers and International Programs at the UW Law School, and who is the Executive Director of the UW-Madison Human Rights Program. Her areas of research and teaching include climate change and human rights, environmental justice, and sustainable development. She uses she, her pronouns, and so please welcome Sumudu.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Okay, great. So thank you so much for this invitation. I'm very excited to be here today. Let me put the timer so that I don't go on forever. So I thought of talking about climate justice and vulnerable communities today. One of the reasons, of course, is that I work on climate change. The other issue is, of course, climate change is one of the defining issues of our times, I think, affecting not just us in the current generation, but in generations to come. So as we know, and it is also very closely tied to sustainability and how we live. So I thought it would be a good topic for today's discussion. So as we know, climate change is a global problem affecting every state, every community, and every locale. So there's no escaping, although the position has been taken by some politicians that, you know, we can insulate ourselves from the consequences of climate change if we are rich and if we have resources or if we are powerful. But that is not the case. As we look around, we are already witnessing the consequences of climate change. And there is enough scientific consensus to show that climate change is contributing to increased wildfires that we are witnessing in on the West Coast, and extreme weather events that we are witnessing in the Gulf Coast, etc. And these weather events are increasing both in intensity and frequency, and these are scientifically established facts. Environmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a UN body consisting of over 100 scientists from around the world, have agreed on this. They study science relating to climate change, and these are established facts. Although climate change is a global problem, and also, sorry, before I get to that, also one of the consequences of climate change is migration. Already some communities have to move because of climate change. This is happening in the US as well. Some people may not be aware that Communities are already being relocated because of climate change. For example, there's an indigenous community in Louisiana, in Ile de Jean Charles, that is being equated to the mainland. There are several communities in Alaska that have to be relocated. Kivalina, Shishmarov, and Newtok are some of these communities. These are indigenous communities who have a very intimate relationship with their land. And many of them don't want to move, but they have no other choice. And because they are to be relocated eventually, nobody's paying much attention to their living conditions, and they live in appalling conditions, and many without basic amenities that we take for granted. And also, there is enough evidence to show that poor and vulnerable communities are disproportionately affected by climate change. Although climate change, as I said, is a global problem affecting everybody, it doesn't affect everybody to the same degree. Again, there are reports after reports that show that racial minorities, women, indigenous groups, children, disabled, they are more affected by climate change and disproportionately affected by climate change and other environmental problems as well. So the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, in their report looking at the link between climate change and human rights in 2009, identified these vulnerable groups that are disproportionately affected. The United Nations Development Program recognized as far back in 2007 that there's a disproportionate impact on the poor and vulnerable. And we also know that the environmental justice movement, which originated in the US, has shown that in the US, racial minorities and people of color are disproportionately affected by environmental pollution. And these polluting industries are predominantly located in poor and minority communities. And more recently, we have seen that COVID-19 has also affected these communities of color, African American communities, Latino communities, much more than other communities, white communities. So as a result, climate change raises profound justice issues. It is really an injustice to realize that those who contributed most to the problem are not those who are affected most. So this happens at the global level when you look at countries. Industrialized countries contributed much more to the problem than developing countries and small island states, but they are disproportionately affected by climate change. So there is an inverse relationship between contribution and impact, both in the global north and in the global south. And you see, even in the United States, the communities that I mentioned earlier, from Louisiana to Alaska, these are minority communities that are affected, indigenous communities that are disproportionately affected. So you see this disproportionate impact at the international level, at the global level, between states, and also within communities, within states, and both in the global north and in the global south as well. So these poor, vulnerable communities include ethnic minorities, Black communities, indigenous groups, people of color, and there are various reasons why they are disproportionately affected. And as we know, structural injustices is one of those reasons. And if you look at principles of environmental justice, and human rights principles of, say, equal treatment, non-discrimination. These are important principles to address these injustices. And one of the issues is, of course, social justice, or injustice, I should say, which is a component of both environmental justice principles as well as sustainability. So we need to address these inherent or structural injustices in society if we are to address climate change, environmental justice, and sustainability, because these are all intertwined. We cannot talk about climate justice without talking about racial justice or economic justice. So what I want to point out is that all these injustices are intertwined. And you see these injustices happening at every level, at the state level, as well as at the community, local level. So we cannot address one injustice without addressing the other. And as I pointed out, these minority groups, racial minorities, and other social minorities are disproportionately affected by climate change. And we know that other health issues and other pandemics like COVID-19 that we are living through right now, these groups are disproportionately affected. So I will stop there and we can talk about the other questions and what we can do to get involved and what the university can do as well. So there now. Thank you. Exactly 10 minutes.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Sumudu. Next up, we'll have Caitlyn LoMonte. Caitlyn LoMonte is a social justice educator with experience working at both large public research institutions and private religious institutions. In her current role at UW-Madison, she creates and facilitates social justice education opportunities centered on identity development and empowering students to create change on campus. Originally from Gainesville, Florida, Caitlyn earned her Bachelor of Arts in Women's Studies and Bachelor of Science in Advertising from the University of Florida before moving to Chicago to pursue a Master's of Arts in Women and Gender Studies from DePaul University. She has experience working with cultural centers, first-generation student services, recruitment and retention initiatives, and orientation. So please welcome Caitlyn.
Good evening, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Caitlyn LoMonte. I use the pronouns she and her, and I serve as the Program Director for Social Justice Education in the newly created Office of Inclusion Education. So the Office of Inclusion Education is a new effort on our campus. It is made up of units that have existed for a long time. And over the summer, the Division of Student Affairs wanted to align and elevate a lot of the diversity, equity, and inclusion work happening. And so they created this new office. It has been in existence since August 1st, 2020, so very new. Within the office, so there's the area that I oversee, which does social justice education programming. There is also the Social Justice Hub, which is located in Union South, as well as the Our Wisconsin program, which for the first time, excuse me, this year is mandatory for all incoming first-year students. And that is a diversity and inclusion workshop that students participate in. So really grateful to be in the space tonight to talk with you all, to answer questions, to think about and interrogate how social justice and sustainability are really deeply woven, as our previous speaker mentioned. So a bit more about what I do and some ways that folks can connect with me. So I really focus focus on providing educational opportunities for students that allow them to interrogate their own identities. So how are they connected to power and privilege? What does that mean for them? How they then can understand systems. So what are some of the systems of power, privilege, and marginalization that we are existing within and interacting with? And then finally, how can we action? So what can we do within our communities, within our spheres of influence to create change, and not just change, but sustainable change, right? Making changes within ourselves and our community members that make our spaces more inclusive and welcoming for all. I primarily do that through workshops and trainings for groups. We do some different panels and bring speakers to campus, as well as a social justice leadership retreat that typically happens in the spring, where we take students off campus to kind of do a deep dive into topics. All of that being said, really try to serve as a resource to our students on campus to talk about social justice. What does that mean? How are they connected to that? What is the work that they are called to do? What are new things that they need to learn? What are things that they need to unlearn in order to really challenge and interrogate a lot of those systems which we operate within, so that we are not continuing those cycles of oppression for ourselves and our community members? When thinking about how social justice is related to the environment, is related to sustainability, I really just come back to the fact that, similar, right, to how social justice is both a theory and a practice, we are both a part of our environment, and it is something that is around us. They are deeply interwoven, interconnected. We cannot be talking about how to protect our environment, how to be sustainable, if we are not also challenging the ways in which racism and anti-Blackness show up. If we are not also having those really hard conversations sometimes about how different systems cause different folks, in particular the topic of tonight's panel, Black, Indigenous people of color, to not be able to operate within the environment or enjoy the environment in the same way. So I often think about who has the right to clean air, to clean water, who has the right to be in the environment. When we think of nature and we think of folks out in the environment, the image that comes to our mind, what identities do those folks hold? I know when I first moved to Madison, folks told me so much about how beautiful Madison was. The lakes, the nature, really great place to be outside. And I think that is true. And I think that when we kind of dig below that surface, we can start to see some of the really intentional ways in which these systems of oppression have made it so that certain folks can enjoy the environment for fun, certain folks don't get to. The way that neighborhoods are divided, the way that resources are divided. I think about the lakes, again, who has to use the lakes as a source of food versus folks only use the lakes as a source of fun, right? How do our identities then intersect with that? I also think that with these larger systems of marginalization and oppression, how we have been socialized or taught to view the environment and our place within it and our roles with it, that is all shaped by the same systems. Again, they are interconnected, deeply woven together. If we are going to try to tackle and address one, we simultaneously be doing that work around anti-Blackness, around racism, classism, all of those other systems. They are kind of feeding each other and working together. When I think about what my role and the folks I work with, what our roles are in regards to addressing how social justice is connected to the environment and sustainability, I really first start with thinking about challenging performative allyship and challenging my own ability to take action and do something. So I try to make sure that I am using my privilege and my power to take risks, to push back, to challenge systems, to speak up, to address the problems that I see, instead of just kind of being a bystander or being someone who claims allyship without doing the action part, without doing that work. I also think about accountability, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, more when we get to questions, but making sure that when we are engaging in spaces where we are trying to center the needs of Black and Indigenous people of color, especially in terms of the environment and sustainability, that when we make a mistake, because we might, because we're humans, we are being accountable. So we're being accountable to Black, Indigenous people of color, we're being accountable to poor folks, we're being accountable to disabled folks. We're really centering accountability in our actions so that we can constantly be learning, growing, and doing this work, and not just, I'm going to do what I want to do because I think that's best for a certain community. I'm really making sure that the communities I'm trying to center get to use their voices and their agency to kind of tell us and lead us in doing the work for them in terms of taking care of our environment, in terms of sustainability, and doing that work that we know is deeply connected to social justice. Those are just some of the initial ways in which I see social justice connected to our topic tonight. Some questions that I often like to leave a group with to really think about, and that I would challenge you all to think about throughout this panel would be, what is your sphere of influence? Where can you have the most direct impact? And how do these values of centering and supporting Black, Indigenous people of color in terms of the environment and sustainability live those values? What do those values look like to you in everyday practice?
Thank you so much, Caitlyn. Those were such great questions to leave us with. Thank you so much for your time. We will move on to Juliana next, our next panelist. So Juliana Bennett is a third-year student at UW-Madison studying finance, international business, and political science. She is also a founder and representative of the UW-Madison BIPOC Coalition. Juliana will introduce the coalition and talk about the story of its formation. She will also speak on the importance of amplifying BIPOC voices and connects that with her own experience as a student on campus. So please welcome Juliana.
Hi. Oh, is it gonna work? Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us and really dive deep into what amplifying BIPOC voices, especially in sustainability, means. I'm Juliana. As you can see up here, one of the co-founders of the UW-Madison BIPOC Coalition. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. We can switch to the next slide. So the BIPOC Coalition is an organization of students. It isn't a student organization, it's an organization of students where we have come together with the objective of supporting and uplifting BIPOC voices at UW-Madison, which is our voices that are generally pushed down in this community. We can go to the next slide. We were formed when we had first all of our students, we had all met and were working together this summer with in May with the original George Floyd protest, and since then we have been all closely connected in activism in the Madison community. Then at the end of the summer, when with the Jacob Blake happened, and it was coming to the anniversary of the March on Washington, this time seems so relevant and almost reminiscent of that time in the March on Washington, and we wanted to bring that event to Madison. So all of the co-founders came together and organized the March on Madison event, where in literally one day of having launched the event, we were able to mobilize over 200 students to fight for Black liberation and bring those issues to the forefront of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. After this march, we had so many people reaching out to us and asking, "Who are you? What are you doing?" And we're like, "We're just students. We're activists. We're trying to make this university a better campus." And then we noticed that we were lacking a organization that could bring together all of the demands in UW-Madison together, so that because when we all come together, then we are able to be stronger and come as a unified voice. We can go to the next slide. And that's when we developed the UW-Madison BIPOC Coalition. We want to be a unified force, including all the marginalized communities, to work towards the same goal of making UW-Madison a more diverse and inclusive campus. Next slide. And that brings us to our mission, that we want to build a unified community of BIPOC voices at UW-Madison and create a platform that realizes and streamlines actionable initiatives that focus on structural change to ensure our members are heard, recognized, and respected. What that means is that value of amplifying BIPOC voices. For far too long, our issues have been pushed aside, shuffled through different channels. We've made all of these organizations within campus that all these diversity initiatives, while they are necessary, if the people that have the power aren't going to listen to these diversity initiatives, then it becomes meaningless. So we want to come together as a collective voice and really truly amplify our voices and make sure that our initiatives are being put through. So in terms of sustainability for BIPOC voices and why it's so important to amplify BIPOC voices and sustainability, I like to think of Flint, Michigan, water crisis that occurred just a few years ago. The water, before it came to the public's attention that the water crisis was a huge problem, the water crisis had been happening for 5 years. People in this community had been reaching out and saying, hey, something's funky about this water, we need help. And for 5 years, these voices, generally people from marginalized backgrounds, were pushed aside and they weren't listened to. Why did it take so long to address this community's needs? Why did it take until there is a whole community without water for us to do something? And I wonder, what if Flint, Michigan, this community of marginalized individuals, what would have happened if we had listened to them before? What would have happened if they were included in conversations, city conversations about sustainability, about their water? They have a right to water just as much as any one of us do. Why did it take so long for them to get the help that they needed? Kind of going back to the last speaker, here in Madison, we are taught to believe, or we come to this beautiful campus and wow, it's so lovely, there's so many parks, there's so much greenery, so many places to run, enjoy the lakes. I encourage you to go to the east side, because they might not say the same thing. On the east side, where it's riddled with not such a beautiful environment, where they aren't able to experience and enjoy the same environment that we experience and enjoy here on Madison. We need to think about what our role as a University of Wisconsin campus is on taking away environment from our own community. For example, one thing is that UW-Madison was built on Ho Chunk land. We need to recognize this. the University of Wisconsin-Madison, right now, you guys that are all on on the UW-Madison campus, we're on Ho-Chunk land. Much of their land has been destroyed. Bascom Hill is a historical site for Native indigenous people. It was a indigenous mound. There were many mounds and historical places for indigenous people that were just torn down by the University of Wisconsin-Madison to build this university for our education, and mostly white education. That's a problem. We need to address how we affect communities, how we, the University of Wisconsin, affects BIPOC voices. So when we as in BIPOC voices, reach out to the university, when we have these conversations, our voices need to be heard and recognized and respected. They really need to be taken into consideration because our lives affect you too. We affect this community just as much as anybody else, and we deserve to enjoy it just as much as anybody else. Thank you. That's all I have for right now.
Thank you so much, Julia. That was great. And thank you so much to all of our panelists so far. As we've mentioned before, we have some pre-chosen questions that we would like to ask the panelists, and then we will open up discussion for audience questions. And just as a reminder, we have a chat box moderator. The name is France, and you can submit questions there anonymously, and then they will be asked if you'd like to do that. So our first question for our panelists is kind of a broad one, one that the whole theme is about. It's, what does amplifying BIPOC voices look like to you? So whoever would like to go first can just take a stab at it.
I can go. So for me, in thinking about what amplifying BIPOC voices looks like, so it starts with listening. It starts with really listening, decentering myself in certain situations, and then using the privilege and power that I hold to take action. So I am listening to Native Indigenous folks talk about their needs in regards to the land we are on in terms of sustainability and the environment. I then am going to hear them, listen to them, and then do what they ask, right? And then use my power and privilege through some of the identities I hold to try to bring about that change and advocate for them, especially in places and spaces where they might not be included, right? Where they might not be sitting at that table or in that discussion. It's really making sure that I am then doing that work in action.
If I can add to that, listening to their stories, their experiences, because we can really learn a lot from them, particularly indigenous groups. When it comes to the environment, there's a lot that we can learn from them. And also giving them a seat at the table, because, what's the point in making decisions if they are not there? These decisions affect their lives, our lives. And if we are not heard and if we are not given a seat at the table, that's why we run into so many issues, because the decisions that affect us, we had no role to play in shaping those decisions. I think those are the things, giving them a voice, listening to them, and giving them a seat at the table, and also learning from their experiences and incorporating those experiences into the strategies and policies that we adopt to address the issues.
Yeah, for sure. And what I have to say basically echoes our other two speakers. to me, amplifying BIPOC voices means uplifting our voices, which are generally underrepresented, and giving BIPOC voices a set platform to ensure their experiences, their thoughts, their suggestions are really listened to and heard and taken into account. A great example of amplifying BIPOC voices is this event. I mean, where we have a set place to talk about these issues, and really dive deep into it. Um, we know that there's a climate gap for minorities in the United States. Let's talk about it. Let's all sit at the table. Let's everybody have a seat at the table. And let's talk about what sustainability means. Let's talk about the issues that BIPOC people face in their environment.
And actually, if I can add to that, I think bringing different voices is very, very important, because particularly for things like climate change and sustainability, a one-size-fits-all approach will not work, because the way we experience things is very different. And also recognizing that everybody matters is very, very important. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Those were great answers. This next question, some of you kind of touched on it in your last answer, but if you have anything new to add, what steps can individuals take to better support BIPOC communities?
Yeah, we did kind of talk about this. I would just say some great initial steps is to listen with your heart to BIPOC peers, refuse to be silent in the face of injustices, speak up, and use your privilege as a platform for BIPOC voices to be heard.
If I can add to that, I think education and awareness raising are very important things. Some people are frankly ignorant, or people choose to be ignorant. I'm not saying that's an excuse for not doing things, but I think talking to people and raising awareness and telling your story, I think, is very important. And also, in my neighborhood, I saw this yard sign which said, "Silence is complicity." Right?
Mm.
If you don't speak up when you see an injustice, that means you're contributing to that injustice. So I think being silent is not an option.
Yeah, I would say make sure that you are doing that self work. So, what are your identities? What power and privilege do you hold through some of your identities? How are you influencing and impacting other folks? Really interrogating your identities, also questioning why do you think a certain way, or why do you believe something, or where did we learn that? Who socialized us to think that a certain group of people deserve something or don't deserve anything at all? So really challenging and questioning things. And making sure that we are, again, being accountable. So being willing to be called in, being willing and open to changing your mind once you have new information. Doing all of those actions can help us to support BIPOC communities in making sure that their needs are met and that they are being centered.
Yeah. Yeah, one thing I would like to add to that I just thought of is something I've heard often is, well, I'm not Black, so it's not my place to say anything, or it doesn't affect me in the same way, so I can't speak to these events. And to me, I think like that's sure you might not be Black, you might not be a BIPOC person, but that doesn't mean that you can't use what you have to make sure that BIPOC people are heard. If you can't speak to it, make sure that somebody that can speak to it is heard. And it's really about having those conversations. And one more thing I would like to add, kind of going off of what Caitlyn was saying, is one thing I've done is just every day think to yourself, what am I going to do today to better myself and better my community? Does that mean signing a petition? It might mean reading a book about BIPOC people. It might be having a tough conversation with a family member. What are you going to do today to help your community?
Thank you. Again, those were great answers. So our next question is kind of a two-parter. In what ways has the UW-Madison community taken steps towards better amplifying BIPOC voices on campus? And how can the UW-Madison community improve its efforts?
Well, I'm pretty sure the students will have a different sort of view of diversity on campus. I would say that we need to increase diversity and inclusion at every level, starting from faculty to the students. I know that the university is trying to take some positive steps, but it's not enough. We have seen that it's still a very white place, and particularly it is also very male-dominated, particularly in the legal field. If you see, although we have more women than men, I mean, the student body has more women than men now. But we need to tackle this at every level. And we also need to carry out more training programs on sensitization and implicit bias. I mean, it's amazing some of the things that we think without thinking, some things that we say without thinking can have such a negative impact, and we need to be aware of what we are doing. So these training programs can do a lot to bring people together, to listen to the other side, and to think how our actions and words can impact other people. And unintentionally. I mean, many of the things that we do happen unintentionally, but they have a huge negative impact on others. So I think these training programs, starting with faculty and how faculty interact with students and other staff members, because I feel that there is a hierarchy as well. We need to address that issue as well. So I think there's a lot still to be done, a lot still to be achieved. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah.
When I first saw this question, I definitely sat with it for a while. So I do want to put out there, so as long as Black, Indigenous, people of color have existed, they have been doing work. They have been pushing for change. They have been leading a lot of these efforts, not just within our UW-Madison community, but within all communities. So work has been done, especially by Black, Indigenous, people of color, by queer individuals, right, by individuals holding marginalized identities. I also spent a lot of time thinking about what we mean when we say UW-Madison community. So are we talking about everyone? Are we talking about the work that students do, that staff do, faculty, senior leadership? Are we talking about those who hold marginalized identities? So when I think of some of the work that I am called to do outside of my role, right, as a queer, multiracial Black woman, I can't just kind of say, I'm done talking about social justice for today. It doesn't matter anymore because it's 5 p.m. These are identities that I live within, so I feel I'm always doing the work and pushing for change. That being said, I do think that spaces like the Multicultural Student Center and their identity-based centers, the Gender and Sexuality Campus Center, I think there are spaces and folks on this campus pushing. I think a lot of that has come from the direct work and labor of students, right? Always pushing for change, always being at the forefront of doing that. Again, not compensated usually. In addition to them being full-time students and having jobs, a lot of it has had to come from their own sacrifice and willing to be in solidarity with one another. All of that said, there's a lot to improve. And I believe that there will be for a very long time, because social justice is always changing. There are always additional ways in which we can be in solidarity, in which we can change and be working towards our collective liberation. I think that this past summer has really shown me the ways in which folks are kind of not held to the same standard of accountability or awareness in terms of what is happening within our world. And what is happening on the UW-Madison community. So I think it needs to be a lot of hard conversations and making sure that those conversations lead us to action and we're not stopping. So reading a book is great. That is a great way to educate yourself. And reading a book is not going to end racism on this campus. So we need to be doing more and pushing for more. And we also need to make sure that folks who hold power on this campus, so administrators, staff, faculty, are the ones leading and doing that work. And we're not just always relying on our students to push change for us within this community.
Yes. Yeah. Look, frankly, UW-Madison has not. This is from a student perspective, okay? To me, to students that I love and talk to, UW-Madison is not doing nearly enough to amplify BIPOC voices. I can tell you from personal experience that, in fact, the university is working to suppress BIPOC voices. The very leader of the university, Chancellor Rebecca Blank, has refused on multiple occasions to listen to BIPOC voices. In fact, after being pressured for over a month by Wisconsin Black Student Union, the General Student Body, and social media outrage, the chancellor then, and only then, reluctantly had one single 1-hour meeting with Black Student Union in which she persistently shot down almost every demand by the Black student body. This is our chancellor. This is the person that's supposed to be leading the university. Take heed in this. The chancellor, Rebecca Blank's continued actions to shuffle around BIPOC voices through meaningless channels and not actually listening and taking direct action towards BIPOC demands is a clear example of what it looks like to not amplify BIPOC voices. It's ridiculous that the top officials that make the decisions that affect our lives have invested no time in listening. We have to listen. We have to take actionable steps to fulfill the university's public mission of ensuring BIPOC students feel welcome and respected. For the BIPOC Coalition, all the demands that we put forward are a blueprint to not only ensure BIPOC students are welcomed and respected, but also it's an outline to create a truly diverse and inclusive campus. And racism on this campus is a public health crisis. It's not the time to be refusing meetings with BIPOC leaders. Now is the time to be listening and amplifying BIPOC voices. Going off the last speakers are saying, I'm a full-time student. I have 18 credits going on. I work, and now I'm co-founding the BIPOC Coalition. I'm not trying to brag. I'm just saying I wish I could just be a regular student. I wish that I could live my life and go out and do my schoolwork and then party on the weekends and have a full college experience. I wish I could do that. I wish that the people that are supposed to care would care. There are a lot of faculty members um, at UW-Madison that do care and want to make change, but it really needs to come from leadership to truly be the pioneers of this change. So I wish I could be a regular student, but I can't. And it needs to come from all of us in the UW Madison community to all say racism doesn't have a place on this campus, and we're no longer going to accept that on the University of Wisconsin-Madison campus.
Oh, sorry. Did someone have anything else to add? Okay. Once again, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for your answers. Our last pre-picked question before we move on to some audience questions is what advice would you give to BIPOC students interested in working in the field of sustainability? And keep in mind that sustainability includes social sustainability, environmental, and economic sustainability.
What I would offer to any Black, Indigenous person of color within the field of sustainability and without is to practice self and collective care. So in order to do this work, you need to be here. You need to be taking care of yourself. Practicing self-care is a form of resistance when we are living and operating within these systems of oppression that exist to take our joy, to harm and damper our experiences by taking care of ourselves, by taking care of our communities. That is, right, social justice work. So making sure that when you're engaged in doing this work, you are remembering yourself, setting boundaries, still having joy and celebrating within your communities. You are not forgetting kind of some of those pieces. I would say also making sure that you realize that you're not alone in doing the work. It is not just up to you to solve all of the issues. It is not just up to you to represent all Black, Indigenous people of color. There are other folks in your community who are working with you. So it's not all on you. And then finally, I'd say to use the resources available to you. So if you're a UW-Madison student, there are ample resources at your disposal. Please use them, right? Ask folks like myself for support, reach out, make sure that when there is a resource that could possibly make your work easier or lift some of that weight off of you, in those resources as you can.
If I can add to that, like I said earlier, talk about your experiences, try and raise awareness of your situation, and also, realize that change takes time because, and I'm not saying that you should wait forever for change to come, but people do resist change. People don't want to change. So, one needs to be patient, but at the same time, realize that, you cannot wait forever for change to come. And also, I would say every little helps because it's the collective action. If 100 people do one little thing together, I think it goes a long way than one person doing one giant thing. So, and finally, I would say don't give up hope. As Brian Stevenson said in his book, Hopelessness is the enemy of justice. So don't give up hope if you do. And also, there's something that we don't realize is that, when we challenge these entrenched norms, um, particularly white people seem to think, they fear that they have to give up something in order to give you something. And that is not the case. So explain to them, we are not asking you to give up anything. We just want to enjoy the same thing that you do, right? So trying to talk to them and trying to make them understand that this is not about attacking them, but ensuring that we enjoy the same rights without discrimination and fear, which is everybody's right. So yeah, and not giving up hope, and that every little helps, I think is my advice.
Yeah, those are all really good points. I really love the hopelessness. Hopelessness.
Brian Stevenson, yeah.
Brian Stevens. I'm gonna look it up.
Oh, yeah, he's great.
Yeah. If I were to add to that, I would have to say, going off of what I've learned this summer, is there's three things. Speak, even if your voice shakes. Speak with your chest. Refuse to allow your voice to be muffled by systemic oppression, and take up space. In classroom, at work, even if you're spending, if you're getting lunch with your peers, take up space. Because your voice and your experience really matters. And you'd be surprised how many people understand or learn from your experience when you speak up. For BIPOC students, I think, especially for me, what I've experienced in the workplace is that there's so much pressure on you, especially if you're the only person in the room that represents who you are. Going off of what Caitlyn was saying, is that there's people that are here that do care. It's this whole thing. It's not of getting social justice. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. It's going to take a while. And if it's and more than a marathon, it's a relay race. So pass that baton. If you're feeling like you need to take time for yourself, pass it to someone else. At the end of the day, maybe I'm just being a hippie right now, but I really believe that love conquers all, and that we will get justice, in sustainability and in our communities. So yeah, just stay encouraged. It will happen. And what you're doing really matters, and it makes a big difference.
Great. Again, thank you so much. We're going to move on to the audience questions. We're only going to do about like a couple just in the interest of time. So our first question from the audience is, how can we address or avoid performative allyship? And this is for anyone to answer, who would ever like to.
So when I think about performative allyship, I immediately reflect on this summer and seeing kind of folks on my social media who were posting, talking about Black Lives Matter, who I have been in personal situations with that have never spoken up about racial injustice before. But we're kind of jumping on that trend of, oh, everyone's talking about Black lives, I'm going to now engage in that. So that is what I think of in terms of performative allyship, not actual work or challenging these systems, but kind of just doing it because that's what's popular, or it seems that's what a lot of folks are doing. So when I try to make sure that I myself am not partaking in performative allyship, I really spend time thinking about what are my motives, right? So why am I engaging in a particular form of activism? Why am I participating? So is it because I want to fit in with folks? Is it because I have fear of, not going along with the crowd? Do I want praise? Do I want thanks for doing something? All of those motives for me kind of set off a little warning bell that it's something might be performative, right? I'm not doing it to actually bring about change. I'm not participating in order to center and highlight the experiences and voices of Black, Indigenous people of color. So I try to make sure that I am rooting myself in the work from the start, by making sure that I am thinking of how I can advocate and how I can bring about change, and not trying to make sure that I am just being politically correct or going with the flow, or trying to kind of show everyone that I am the best ally. I also make sure that I am not doing performative allyship by listening to and following the lead of Black, Indigenous people of color. So when folks hold those marginalized identities and they say, this is how I need you to show up as an ally, that is what I do. I don't kind of insert myself or my experiences. I let those folks take the lead, and make sure that I am listening and following and showing up the way that they want me to.
Yeah, really to echo that, I think a big thing about avoiding performative allyship is thinking about what your motive is. Like Caitlyn was saying, it really is about thinking about why am I out here. When I think about performative allyship, I really think about the original protest at the end of May with George Floyd, and then again after Jacob Blake was shot 11 times. I think about how we drew so many people out there. There were so many people all of a sudden that like care about Black lives, which is so cool. It was so awesome, but those numbers dwindled down so quickly. Performative allyship is not just coming out when it's cute or when it's socially acceptable because a protest is in Coachella. We're not out here just to take some pictures and pretend like we actually care about the Black people and listen to the Black people for a couple minutes and then go back to your regularly scheduled lives. This is our lives, and it's always going to and it's always happening. Being a performative ally, being a true ally is, I would say, is being the term a co-conspirator. It means that you're going to be with Black, Indigenous people of color through and through. That doesn't mean you have to be out here every single day. But it means that you're going to live by the values of not being silent and taking direct action.
Yeah, if I can add to that, you will always find people who jump on the bandwagon because it's fashionable or it's the in thing right now. So I think we need to really question our motives and to see whether we are genuinely interested in that issue, and whether we are genuinely contributing to the cause. Sometimes, people make it worse by participating, and we have seen that happen too. Um, so yeah, questioning the motive and genuinely trying to do something to effect change, I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, thank you again for such great answers. And I want to say thank you to everyone who submitted questions. And I'm sorry we can't get to all of them. But the next question we're going to hit on, and our final one, is open to everyone. It says, can you expand on about the importance of changing lived experiences in policy and change? Whether you touch on your own experience or a more general perspective, How important is it to talk about and understand the lived experience of BIPOC students in the UW community's nature, outdoor recreation, and environment?
Just to clarify, the question is asking to understand the how important it is or why it's important to understand the lived experience of BIPOC. Oh, I see the question now. Thank you.
Yes, sorry, it's a long question, so I put it in there to reread.
I can answer. So for me, I don't know how to do social justice work if I am not centering those lived experiences of Black, Indigenous people of color and folks who hold other marginalized identities. So Caitlyn, I only know what I know. I only have my identities and I know what works for me and how I like to be validated and what my needs are. So I am not able to speak for every identity. I'm not able to speak for every group. So I need to hear other folks' experiences and their stories and the needs that they have. How they want me to show up for them if we are going to be in solidarity with one another and building these coalitions together. So by having folks who have different identities, who have different experiences, that is how we get to social justice. That is how we get to an actual inclusive community. We have to have those folks and we have to be giving value and worth to their experiences. I would say to address that second part, so when thinking about UW-Madison's natural space, the outdoor recreation, the environment. Again, as mentioned earlier, we are on Native land, right? Indigenous folks should be leading those discussions and those decisions. We have a land acknowledgement. I think that is a really important first action to acknowledge the history of this land, who it rightfully belongs to. I also like to tell groups I work with that once we have acknowledged something, the kind of next thing would be to take action. So what does accountability now look like for us as an institution, for us as a community, since we have acknowledged that we are on stolen land? How do we make sure that decisions moving forward are done and centered on Indigenous folks, right? The Ho-Chunk people. How do we do that? How do we navigate that process? And so if we were to be more intentional and strategic and really committed to doing that, I think we would then see more policy change. Our practices of how we navigate and take up space, how we build on campus, how we move about campus would probably also change because we would be directed by folks who were the rightful owners of this land and space that we are on. So again, to summarize all of that, I think it is crucial that we do listen to those experiences. We can only know and pull from our own stories. And so if we are really striving for inclusion and social justice, we have to be including those who have different experiences and different identities if we're going to try to do that work within our community here at UW.
If I can add to that, I think it's really important to acknowledge the injustices, as the previous speaker pointed out. Unless we acknowledge that these historic injustices, historic racism, structural racism is taking place, we'll never be able to make any changes because we are ignoring the past. We are not acknowledging that these injustices have taken place, are taking place. So I think that's the first step to making change, acknowledging. And then also listening to the lived experiences, because as the previous speaker pointed out, we cannot know the experiences of every different category. So we have to listen to them. Without that, you know, at the beginning also I mentioned that without these stories, without these experiences, we cannot make any interventions. What do we know? I mean, how do we know that the interventions we make are the necessary ones, that they will work? The changes, what are the changes that are required? So without those experiences, we cannot move forward. So it's very, very important to listen to them, get them to the table, discuss, and move forward. But without acknowledging that these injustices are taking place, I think it's very, very difficult to move forward.
Yeah. To echo my own experience or the friend of mine or the experience of my friend experience in the Madison outdoors. I when I think about this, I think about my friend who is a black male, who was one day he was um walking down the lakeshore path. Um, he was walking home down the lakeshore path, and he just happened to be behind a white female. He was just walking, and eventually he started noticing that the woman kept turning around, like, "Huh, is this person following me?" Looking very frightened and scared, and eventually started walking faster, and then eventually running away from my friend, who was just a black dude walking home, who happened to be on the lakeshore path. And when we think about these experiences, we have to think that what privilege plays in just enjoying the outdoors. For him, it meant next time he was on the lakeshore path, he didn't feel comfortable. He now is always going to think, am I making someone feel uncomfortable just because of the color of my skin? Um, so it's really important, even in the Madison outdoors, that we are recognizing the experiences of Indigenous people past, the experiences of Indigenous people present, and the future of that, and how we can change that future.
Yes. Thank you again so much. We're going to wrap up there just in the interest of time and Blackboard. But thank you so much to all of our panelists. You guys you all were great. Thank you to everyone for joining us. Thanks as well to the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies and Facilities Planning and Management, which are the two administrative homes for the Office of Sustainability. As a reminder, this is the first event that is part of a new series. So we will have an event on the last Wednesday of each month at 7 p.m. Central Time. Our next event will be on Wednesday, October 28th, and our theme will be sustainability in the election. So make sure to follow us on social media at SustainUW to stay up to date about future themes and guest panelists. Thank you so much to everyone for coming, and I hope you have a good rest of your night. So thank you.